And so what I normally do at this point is tell everyone in the audience that I'm going to try and change their view of plants a little bit. But you're all gardeners, right? So you all know that plants are awesome and plants are amazing. So rather than change your view, I'm going to hopefully equip you with a little bit more ammunition to be able to say, yeah, plants are truly amazing, and do things that we might not expect them to be doing. So we all know that plants respond to the world around them. This is a movie of something that there's no shame in this. We've all done this. This is forgetting to water your plant. And so this is wilting. This is coleus. That plant is clearly responding to the lack of water in its environment. But plants are amazing. We all know plants are incredibly robust. Water it again, and bink, it comes back again. But clearly, there's an interplay between biology and the world around it, and no, that's no surprise to anyone. If you start looking at it in a little bit more detail, you can begin to see that those interactions are actually kind of cool and quite complicated. And so this is going to be the same deal. We're not going to be evil gardeners now. We're going to continue watering the plant. This is a time-lapse movie of what a huge number of us are going to be doing very, very soon. This is tomato seedlings germinating and growing over the course of a couple of weeks. And all we're going to do is time-lapse it and watch as those seedlings grow. And it's going to be grown in the same way that we all grow the seedlings, which is that we're going to have them germinate, and then you're going to see that they look a little bit dry, but not too dry. You catch it in time. Add a little bit of water, wait a few days, keep an eye on it, looking a little bit dry, add some more water. The pennies which are stuck into the pot, they are just a good visual indicator of, when the soil is beginning to get a little bit dry, they'll start to move inwards as the soil shrinks, and then you add water and they'll come back out again. And also, the guy who did the time lapsing for this is very nicely just put water in there every so often, right? When at the point where you're doing the watering, then it'll be flashed up on the video. And I think it's just kind of cool to see. There's the germination, there's watering, and now drying out a little bit and watering, and drying out a little bit and watering, and drying out a little bit and watering. And if every time that you see watering, you can see a big sort of burst and a jump in growth. Maybe not that surprising, although it is kind of interesting to see the fact that everything slows down until you water, and then bang, you get the burst of growth, and then everything slows down, and bang, gets a burst of growth. But it's clearly the world interacting with the plants and the plants dealing with the world around them. And again, I don't think that's massively surprising, that we all know that plants have to deal with sort of the things like how much nutrients that they have in the soil, last time you fertilize them, when you're watering them, and they absolutely have to be able to respond to that changing environment. Otherwise, all your plants are going to be dead. All right. But it's a little bit more sophisticated than that when you actually start like pulling it apart. And so here's a Phalaenopsis that's just been grown on a windowsill. And we all know that if you're growing your plants, probably many of you are doing this at the moment, you have your prize plants on the windowsill. But in order to keep them growing sort of healthy and straight, you're going to be rotating that pot every few days. Because if you leave the plants on the windowsill with light coming from one direction, they are going to grow towards the light. And again, not a huge surprise. It's the plants having stimuli and inputs from their environment, and they're growing in response to them. We know that plants need water. We know they need mineral nutrients in the soil. And we also know they need light. And so this is not such a amazing thing to just go like, oh, like that plant is clearly growing towards the light. So they're responding to the environment. But when you start to look at how they're responding to the environment, and especially when you can sort of move their time frame into our time frame, and the hard thing for a lot of sort of understanding what plants are doing is that they are growing, and by definition, their growth is very, very much slower than, are moving around and are looking at things. And so, a lot of people see plants and they don't see anything happening. But now what we're going to do is take plants and move them into our time frame. So we're going to do some time lapse again. In this case, these are corn seedlings. And so this is a researcher in Indiana University, does some absolutely awesome time lapse movies. This is literally, he just planted some corn in a pot, let it grow up, right? So we've got those little corn seedlings, which have just broken through the soil. And then in a dark room, he has lowered a light bulb, and it's literally sitting in the middle of the pot. And this movie, amongst plant biologists, is affectionately known as corn worship. And I think it'll be pretty obvious why. Right. So we're just going to, these plants are literally just growing in response to that direction of light. Like, oh, grow towards the light. Oh. And it's awesome. This is clearly, oh, then you turn the light on in the rest of the room and they grow back up straight. But if you look at them, you can see little kinks because the response to the direction of light was a growth response, and growth is irreversible. Those plants were just getting longer and longer and longer. And now, once that direction that they're growing in has changed because light's now coming all the way from above, they straighten up, but they've got the kink of where they were growing towards the light. So not only are they just sort of responding, they're having to respond in a sort of a sophisticated way where they have to be monitoring the direction of the light, right? Because they were growing towards the light. And then when the direction of light changed, they changed their direction of growth. So again, maybe not such a great revelation, but it tells you that they have to be able to sense the world around them and respond to it. Now we could try and, right? So plants clearly are able to sense their environment. When you stopped watering them, they knew you had stopped watering them. And when you put the water back, there's a burst of growth. They're taking up that water, but they're also monitoring the fact that water is now available again. So let's set that as sort of, maybe that's pretty obvious, that the biological organisms sense the world around them and respond to it. And in this case, we've got light and we've got water. I'm going to put that into context now because, all right, sensing and responding. How sophisticated is that? So let's look at something that is fantastically complex in its sensing and responding and its information processing. So this is one of our gardener's friends. This is a squirrel, and this is a squirrel, as you will see, that has going to do some amazing feats of kind of having practiced something, knowing what to do, and just using its sensory inputs and its ability to process information to do something like really quite remarkable. So that's a lot of sensory information that squirrel is using, a lot of sort of the problem solving thing of taking in information and processing it. And it feels very, very different from what plants do. And I would go, like, it just does, it looks like on a different realm of understanding the world around you and then doing things to deal with it. But when you actually start pulling plants again, and again, you've got to move them into our time frame and sort of the world that we live in. Once you begin to try and look at what they're doing, there are immense parallels. So, for instance, this is a sunflower plant growing in a garden. This is in the morning, the sun's going to rise on, it's just risen on the right-hand side of the screen. And this is going to be time-lapsed during the course of the day. And eventually, the sun's going to move over and going to be setting on the left-hand side of the screen. It'll be very obvious. You'll see all the shadows. What the sunflower is doing is a thing called solar tracking. It is pointing its leaves flat to the direction of the sun. Right? So it's monitoring light direction, optimizing photosynthesis. And as the sun moves, right? So now later in the day, you can see the shadows coming across and the leaves begin to point in towards where the sun is going down. And then nighttime, all right, now keep an eye on it. The sun isn't there anymore. But that plant has predicted, right? And then the sun comes up. So that sunflower not only was doing the sort of the taking in information, the sensory thing, which is the solar tracking. But if you think about it, at night, it not only knew what direction the sun was going to rise again in the morning, it also must have known what time it was because it pointed its leaves towards where the sun is going to rise, not just tracking where the sun is, predicting where the sun's going to rise and knowing what time to point its leaves in the correct direction. So now we've got plants sensing their environment. They can sense light, they can sense water, they can sense a tremendous number of different things directly, just, the thing is happening. But now we have to put in there that they appear to have a sense of time of day as well. They must have a clock built into them somehow, like we do. We kind of know what time of day it is. And they must also be able to remember things because that sunflower remembered what direction the sun was going to rise in. So this is getting a little bit more like into this more kind of like the squirrel world of like a little bit more sophisticated, taking in information, processing it, and doing the right thing to be successful. But we know that plants lack neurons. We know what nerves are anatomically. They're very clear what structures they are. Plants don't have them. We know what a brain is. It's that squishy thing on the top of your head inside your skull. And we know exactly what that looks like at a sort of an anatomical structural level. And we know that plants don't have those. So we know that this is not what a plant is like. All right. It might have stems, but it does not have a brain. And so I put this slide in just to remind me to say that for the rest of the talk, inevitably, we are going to use the words and language that describe how human beings process information and interact with the world and all that kind of stuff. But we're going to be talking about plants. And there's not really any other way to talk about them. I'm going to talk about plants maybe thinking or plants knowing what direction the sun's going to come out. And inevitably, because of those words, you begin to just think of them in the terms that we do things, with our incredible brains and nerves and muscles and stuff like that. So just sort of keep in the back of your mind that when we're using these words, we're not saying that plants are doing the same things as human beings, but the outcomes are going to be in the same biological realm. So what does it mean for a plant to think? I don't know. But it's clearly, if you think that thinking is taking in information and processing it and doing the right thing with what's happening in the world around you, if that is thinking, then plants must be thinking, but they're not using the machinery that we have. There's a different way that they're doing it. All right, so let's take some other things that are very clear that we do as animals, and let's project them into the plant world. So this is one of my favorite videos off YouTube of all time.
Oh, you look like a little monkey.
That's what Annie.
All right, so that is the touch response in a kitten. So what does it look like if you touch a plant or talk to your plant? All right, and there was touch stimulation for that kitten, and it's very easy for us to understand what the kitten was doing. But what happens if you touch a plant? Does a plant even know that it's been touched? If you're like poking your plant or cleaning off the leaves, it might not know what you're doing, but does it know that you're there? So, and again, I'm using the word know, and immediately we're all thinking of like the way that we know things by processing information in our brain. Remove that area and just go, do plants have a way of monitoring the fact they're being touched and that to trigger responses inside the plant? And the classic example of this would be the sensitive plant, right? And so you can buy these. They're awesome plants. They move in our time frame. So this is why they're a great example of how all of this works. So sensitive plant, we're looking at the leaflets of the sensitive plant, and it's going to respond to being damaged. This is damaged by an evil plant scientist, and the damage is going to be a cigarette lighter. It's the reason to do it is just to show the response, but also to provide a very, very localized bit of, in this case, damage. But you can do exactly the same thing by just touching the tip of the leaflet, right? So all of the information is going to appear. It's going to be very obvious that it's appearing absolutely at the tip of the leaflet on the right-hand side. So, oh, there's cigarette lighter, and there is, like, this is all real time. This is what the plant does. And it's folding up its leaflets. And the mechanism of how that's happening, that's not muscles. It feels like, it kind of looks like it's us, right? But the mechanism is very different. There are cells at the base of each of those bits of the leaflet, and they're pumped up with water at high pressure, and they are deflating in response to this stimulus. And as they deflate, it's just like letting air out of a balloon. They deflate and everything folds up. If the stimulus is a lot bigger, again, it's very localized. And again, you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, there's the flame. But again, I could do exactly the same thing by poking the tip of this leaflet. If the stimulus is bigger and longer, we'll get the same thing happening. But then the plant goes, oh, well, that was pretty big. Oh, and then everything collapses. Right? Remember, the mechanism is not muscles, but it's very fast movement. And we now actually, this has been sort of a mystery for a very long time. Why would the plant do this? But now there's some pretty good evidence that what's happening is it's kind of trying to flick off. Imagine that there was an insect beginning to chew on the leaf. The leaves collapse, the insect falls off, and it protects it from herbivory. Or there's insects moving around in the environment, and it just doesn't want to be very conspicuous, so it folds itself up. It's entirely reversible. If you leave this plant for a couple of hours, those cells that have deflated will pump themselves full of water again, and the leaves will all open up. So that there's rapid movements here. We can begin to piece together how is all of this system working inside the plant, and we're going to begin to see that there are parallels to how these information movement systems work with animals. But in order to get there, we're going to have to leave the garden for just a few minutes and think about what it means for bioluminescence to occur. And here is a firefly. We probably all have seen these flying around in the summer in Wisconsin. And that is biochemistry going on inside that firefly to generate light. And don't worry, we're going to get back to how plants signal in just a minute. But in order to get there, we got to think about this bioluminescence, because it's going to build a tool for us to see the signaling work. All right. So hopefully everyone's got a good feel for fireflies giving off light. But they're not the only organisms that are bioluminescent. And so, for instance, here is a jellyfish. And this is our important organism. This is a crystal jelly. And if you look at it, you can see that sort of ring of green glow around the bottom. That is bioluminescence. People still argue about why a jellyfish would be bioluminescent, and there's ideas that, fish look up, they see lights above them and they think it's the stars, and so they don't go and eat the jellyfish, and all ideas like that. But the important thing for us is that the reason that ring of light occurs is because that jellyfish makes a protein and that protein can glow green. It's called green fluorescent protein. It's been once people worked out that it existed, it's an incredibly major tool for understanding how biology works because it's a protein. And because it's a protein, there's a gene in that jellyfish that encodes for it. And what people found out is you can take the gene from the jellyfish and genetically engineer it into other organisms. So yes, it has been put in cats, and you can make green fluorescent cats, which I guess makes them easy to find at night. But the important thing for us is that you can engineer that green protein into plants. We can go one step further, and this has been work which has been done by a lot of biomedical researchers in the sort of the human medical world. You can tinker with that protein and you can make it glow brighter or dimmer in response to signals which cells generate. And so this is just to give you a feeling for how this helps you see what's going on inside organisms. So you can take neurons, right? You can take an organism, a mouse or something like that, and you can engineer this green protein into the mouse. And so that green protein is going to be produced in all the neurons of its brain. And then you can stick a camera and you can look at the brain and you will see flashes of light. And those flashes of light are telling you that signals are being generated inside those neural cells. So this movie, which is playing on your right, is like nerve signals moving backwards and forwards. It's like thinking, right? But we can see the individual cells within the brain firing off. And it's all because this tool had been developed. And the signals inside the cells are changes in the level of calcium, which is a big cellular signal. But for us, the important thing is we've got a tool now which lets us see signals being generated inside intact organisms. If we can do it with mice and rats, we can totally do it with plants. We can put this reporter inside the plant and we will be able to see the signals it generates. So again, here's our sensitive plant that is doing its rapid responses. What does it look like as far as the signal that are being generated? Do they look like that nervous thing that we just saw? Well, here is looking at one of those leaves of a sensitive plant. We're looking now at the image of the internal signals with this green fluorescent protein, and the researcher is going to touch the very tip of the leaf and keep an eye. You can see those sort of hot spots that run down at the base of each of the leaf. Just keep an eye on those. So there's the touch about now, and there's little flashes of light that move their way down. And let me just move the movie back. And so I move it forward. You can kind of see that as the leaves fold up, there's this cascade of signaling that is moving down through the plant. Now, it's not nerve conduction, right? Nerves don't exist. But it is that same cascade that we saw of cells talking to cells, talking to cells, that are triggering responses that we just saw about how the nervous system works. It's a very different system, but the biology underlying it, of these rapid changes, is totally there. And if you look at the time frame we're talking about now, these signals are being generated inside plants in less than a second. Right? So we're moving the things that we have to think about how plants work into the realm of our world. Right? They are totally sensing and responding at the time frame that we think about. And in this sensitive plant, things play out just so quickly that it's very obvious that their responses are also in that time frame. Is that mimosa plant just a weird plant, right? Or is it sort of telling us that, yeah, we have to think about plants being an incredibly rapid piece of biology. They work in the same time frame that we do. It's just that normally we can't see them doing that. Well, here is another plant. This is a cress plant, and it also has this sensor put into the plant. And on the left, you can see the plant, and the pane on the right is just zooming in on the surface of a leaf. And what the researcher who did this, Matsusugu, did, he took just like a little tip of a pen, a plastic pen, and he's literally not damaging or anything. He's just stroking the surface of the leaf. And there he's writing the word touch in the touch signal that the plant is generating. Remember, what we're seeing is the internal cells responding to that touch stimulus. So what have we got now? We've got plants clearly are able to sense their environment. No dramatic insight there. Now they appear to have the sense of time, and they can remember things. And now they've also got a sense of touch that operates as fast as our sense of touch. Another example of touch, which many of you will know, is this. This is the Venus flytrap. It's got these traps that are made out of leaves, and as flies clamber through the traps, they shut. Very similar to the sensitive plant in how quickly they shut. The reason that they shut is because they have a sensory hair. There's the sensory hair, and when a fly touches that sensory hair, the plant knows that the fly is in the trap, and then it triggers the trap to shut. It turns out that just triggering that hair once is not enough. And in fact, it's very obvious that you have to trigger it twice. So here's coming in with just a metal rod, right? And where it doesn't matter how much you flick the plant around, it's not going to respond. You have to be a fly clambering through the trap. But if you touch the hair once, nothing happens. But you touch it twice, and it shuts. All right. So it's a touch sensing system, but it's a bit more sophisticated now. And if we go to our green fluorescent protein and we can visualize the signals being generated, you can begin to see how you get this sort of like, oh, you mean you have to touch it twice? So what we're going to see here, it will be obvious when it lights up, is we're seeing one of these traps. But the red bar that you can see, that is a little needle, and it's been pushed in, and it's going to push against the sensory hair on the inside of the trap. You can see the picture of it in the top right-hand corner. And remember, this is one of these sensing plants where when it gets brighter, it's generating cellular signals. So that's touch the first hair, the whole trap lights up. Touch it again, it gets even brighter, and then it shuts. So you touch the sensory hair once, and the whole trap knows it's been touched, but it knows, maybe that's a leaf or something that's fallen through the trap. It needs to be triggered twice because that's a pretty good indication that it's a fly clambering around inside the trap. So now, and we know the mechanism now. You trigger the hair once, it generates cellular signals, and the trap is ready and poised, it's ready to go. You trigger it twice, a bigger signal, and that triggers that trap to shut. So now, what have we got? We've got plant sensor environment, okay? They can know the time, they can remember things, they've got a sense of touch, but not only have they got a sense of touch, they can also count. I mean, they're counting to 2, but I think that counts as counting. One trigger of the hair did lots of stuff, but the plant was sitting there waiting, and it had counted to 1. And you had to trigger it twice. It has to count to 2 in order for the trap to shut, because 2 tells you it's not the wind blowing through the trap. It's not a leaf falling through the trap. It's a fly clambering around inside the trap. All right. So what about gardening world then? What do we think of how do these kind of ideas that plants are responding quickly and elaborately with lots of cellular signals in the world that we are all going to be inhabiting in just a few weeks' time when we're outside and where we have our plants and we've got like, oh, insects are eating them, or we're pruning the plants, you know, and we're doing, if you think both of those are very similar in that they are physically damaging the plant. So what happens then? Well, go back to our green fluorescent protein, our way of seeing cellular signals, these calcium signals being generated inside a plant. And here we have what we're looking at is a plant. Down the bottom left-hand corner is a leaf with a leaf stalk, and then towards the top right, a rosette with more leaves on it. And what we're going to do in a very, very antisocial way for this plant is we're going to release onto it a very, very hungry caterpillar. And you're going to see the caterpillar, everything's sped up about 20 times, but the caterpillar is going to start chewing away at the leaf. You're going to have no problem seeing where the caterpillar is eating. But keep an eye on what happens to the leaf it's eating, but also look at what happens to the leaves it's not eating, but are connected to the leaf, the part of the plant which is being eaten. So there's the caterpillar eating, and then there's all the rest of the plant is lighting up. I mean, the place it's eating is lighting up, and it almost looks like it's got veins, right? But remember, these, when it gets brighter, that is cellular signals being generated. And that is the leaf veins. That's the vasculature of the leaf, right? Which is lighting up. But it's acting as a highway for signals to move throughout the plant. And we actually know, like the chemical level, we know what those signals are. So here is another one of our reporter plants. The leaf to the very far right, we're going to put a droplet of a chemical, which is the chemical damage signal. And it's the amino acid glutamate. You've all probably heard of monosodium glutamate, you know, MSG for making meals taste yummy. It's exactly the same chemical, but when you break cells in plants, it leaks out of those broken cells, and it leaking out is the trigger that tells that plant it's being damaged. So we're literally just going to put a drop of that glutamate signal on that right-hand leaf, right? But look at what happens to the rest of the plant. And remember, this is sped up about 20 times. But so this whole thing is probably going to play out over just a couple of minutes. So there's the drop. And there is the whole plant lighting up with signals. One way to think about that is that we put a drop of a chemical that tells the plant it's been wounded, and all of those signals that course through the plant are the plant screaming about the fact it's been wounded. But it's all happening in our time frame, seconds to minutes. So now, next time you're mowing your lawn, the grass is screaming. You just can't hear it, right? All of those damage signals are being generated. But it turns out there are other signals that are being generated when you're mowing the lawn. And again, this has sort of been understood now by these plants that let us see the signals which are being generated inside the plant in real time. So here's a very, very simple experiment that tells you a lot about what it means when you are pruning a plant or where you're mowing the lawn. So we're going to take a leaf, and we are either, and both of these treatments will work, we're either going to take a pair of scissors and just chop up the leaf, or we're going to take caterpillars and we're going to put them on the leaf, and the caterpillars are going to start eating that leaf. But then we're going to take all of that and we're going to put it in a flask, and we're going to pass the air that is coming off that leaf, whether it's damaged by chopping up or by the caterpillar, and we're going to take that and we're just going to waft it over a plant. And that's the plant you see on the right. And again, it's one of these plants that lets you see the plants generating their internal signals in real time. And so we're going to start wafting it now. And what are we at, like a few minutes in? And hopefully you can begin to see the plant is lighting up with signals. This is another great one where if I pull the movie back and just do it very quickly, it's very obvious that as that gas, which is being produced by the damaged plant, is wafting over a completely undamaged plant, the one on the right, right? We're just wafting the gases from the damaged plant over it. That undamaged plant is totally responding. We know what the chemical is. One of the main chemicals which is triggering this response is the chemical hexanal. You know, chemistry doesn't really matter what it is, except if you smelt hexanal, it is the characteristic smell of newly mown grass. So now when you're mowing the lawn, what's going on? Right? The damaged grass is emitting this chemical that is triggering responses in other plants. So one way to think about that is that the damaged plant is warning the other plants around it that it's being damaged, like get ready, put your damage defenses on. That probably is not what's going on. It's probably much more that plants have sensors that can sense that chemical. And the damaged plant isn't being altruistic and sending out information. It's much more that the other plants are doing a thing which we call eavesdropping. When you chop up a plant, when you mow the lawn, the damage causes chemistry that releases that chemical. Other plants just happen to be able to sense that chemical, and that chemical provides information that there are other damaged plants in the area. But it isn't that the damaged plant is telling the other plants it's damaged. It's just the other plants have the ability to eavesdrop on the fact that the damaged plant is emitting these chemicals. So eavesdropping is probably a big deal about how information passes between individual plants. So eavesdropping, one of the other things you could imagine that eavesdropping is about sound, right? And now we're getting very close to when I talk to my plants, are they listening to me? So this is a time-lapse movie of corn growing. And if you look at the stalk in the middle, you'll see that the corn growers have taken a Sharpie, and you can see 3 black ticks on the side of the corn stalk. And what they've also done is put a microphone against that corn stalk, and we're going to play a time lapse, and you're going to see the corn growing. And we all know corn is fantastically fast at growing. I think it's just kind of cool to see how fast it does grow, which is mind-blowingly fast. But it's also cool to hear, people say you can hear the corn grow. 100% true. And this is what it sounds like. So that rustling, cracking sound is thought to be the corn growing so fast that the fibers that make up its structure are being stretched, and some of them are snapping. And the cell walls are under a lot of tension, and there's lots of cracking going on. And you can imagine that other organisms, maybe insects, can detect that sound, because that sound changes depending on how fast the plant's growing. So the plant is sort of emitting a signal of how healthy it is by how fast it's growing from that sound signature. And researchers have beginning to be able to listen to the sound of the plant growing, and then use all artificial intelligence, all the things you would imagine, to basically interpret the sound, listen to what the plant's saying, and then work out what the plant is doing from its sound. But I'd like to go the other way and then ask, well, if plants emit sound and that carries information, can plants listen? Which sounds a very weird question to actually speak out loud. Do plants have ears? Well, clearly they don't have ears. But can they detect sound? And does it carry information for them? All right. So this is absolutely awesome. This is one of my most favorite movies. There's a bottom left-hand corner, there's an insect. It's chewing on a leaf. The researchers who did this, Roger Misen, put a laser microphone on the leaf, incredibly sensitive microphone, and it is recording the sound of the chewing of that insect. So this is what it sounds like. Right? That is the sound of you being eaten alive if you're a plant. And you might go, oh yeah, but of course there's sound, this insect's rasping away and chewing it. And occasionally I think I can hear that in my house plant, right? There's clear that insects make these noises. However, what another couple of researchers did, Heidi Apple and Reg Cockcroft, they went, well, what does the plant use that information? So they took the green-veined white butterfly, Pieris rapa, they took its larva, its caterpillar, right? They recorded the sound that it makes when it's chewing on the leaf. And then they do this absolutely awesome experiment. They take a plant which has never seen an insect, right? So this is a perfectly healthy, perfectly happy plant. And then they play the sound of being eaten to the leaf, to a leaf on that plant, right? And it makes it look very sciencey. It's got PBL and SL on this. PBL is the playback leaf. They put a speaker, they literally glue a speaker to the leaf and they vibrate this leaf with the sound of being eaten, right? But the leaf has never been eaten. This plant's never seen an insect. And then there's this other leaf called SL. What is SL? It's the sampled leaf. What they do is they look what happens in that leaf, right? That leaf hasn't even had the sound, right? The sound is being played to the playback leaf, but they are going to monitor a lot of things that happen, but in that sampled leaf, right? And right, as a scientist, you lose your scientist card if you don't show one graph in the talk. I'm going to show one graph. It's not going to be too complicated, but hopefully it's going to show you that if you play the sound of being eaten to a leaf, the rest of the plant freaks out and thinks it's being eaten and switches on its defenses. And it's very simple. So if you look at the bars in the middle of the graph, like science, I have to do one graph, otherwise I just explode. When you play back no sound, or you can even play back the sound of an insect walking on the leaf but not chewing it, and measure responses in the leaf. This happens to be the production of a pigment called anthocyanin, which plants produce when they're stressed out. If you don't play any sound or play a non-eating sound, then plants have a little bit of this stress compound. But if you play the chewing sound, then the other leaves on the plant begin to turn purple and they begin to switch on all their defenses because they think they are being, the rest of the plant's being eaten. But remember, it's not being eaten. It's literally the sound of being eaten that's triggering these responses. It's just phenomenal. So now what have we got? Plants sense their environment, they sense touch, they have a sense of time, they have memory, they can count, they can smell, right? They smelt the mown grass, but also they very, very clearly, they are listening to you, right? They have the capability to process information carried by the vibrations of sound. So if you're talking to your plants, you are triggering responses in them, but they're not listening to you in the way that we think about listening, right? They're taking in information. If that information is useful for them, they are processing it and doing the right thing. And for that insect, the right thing is defend yourself when another part of you is being eaten. And so just as a parting thought, which is a great place to finish. So salad is good for you, right? If you look at that picture of the salad, everything on there is plants and everything is alive, right? You didn't cook any of it, which kills the plant. The lettuce is alive. The tomato, it's alive. So all the stuff that we've been talking about totally plays out inside your mouth when you are chewing on your salad. Does that mean you shouldn't be eating salad? No, right? But it is great to think about that all this stuff it happens in the real world. It happens in your houseplants, happens in your garden, and it totally happens in your salad. And that, I think, is a great place to stop and see if there are any questions. Oh, I don't think If you, as a biologist, if you phrase it as, do organisms use information in the world around them, including information from other organisms? It's, put it in the context of human beings. Do human beings use the information in the world around them and use information that comes from other organisms? That information doesn't necessarily have to be like consciously emitted as a signal by the other organism, but you know, we smell flowers. Flowers smell of the perfumes that they have to attract their pollinators, right? So there's, I don't, you could ask exactly the same thing of bacteria. Do bacteria emit signals that other bacteria respond to? No one will worry about that at all. The point where it gets very complicated is the language part of it. When we start using the language, and inevitably we can't not use this language about how we as human beings take in information, how we think about things. What are we going to do? We have to be able to use that as sort of a framework to think about other organisms, but it sort of leads you into the trap of wanting to make other organisms into humans. And clearly, plants aren't green animals, but they absolutely pass information between individuals, and they clearly pass information around inside their own body, but it's done in a different way, and some of the information is very, very different. But yeah, totally. I don't think anyone would argue against the idea that biology uses information in the environment to do good things. Well, that is an absolutely awesome question to which I do not have a good answer. Clearly, there is a period of time where, and then I'm gonna do the anthropomorphizing thing again, where the plant is freaking out, right? Where the plant, it's you know, adaptively correct, but it should be defending itself because that damage may be imminent. And in the case of an insect, you can imagine you have to defend yourself incredibly quickly, because if one leaf of you is being eaten and it takes you 2 days to switch on your defenses, by the time you switch on your defenses, you're not going to be there anymore. So the timeframes have to be appropriate for what the sort of the environmental factor is. We know that they subside as well. So they come up and they subside down. The timeframes, for instance, for if we take a pair of scissors and cut a plant, the time frame for the internal signals to sort of abate is going to be tens of minutes. So that immediate response is going to be thinking in that time frame. The time it takes to trigger them, less than a second. The time frame for things like chemical defenses to be built up and disappear, those might be much, much longer time frames. And it's probably going to be different for each signal. So it's a great question. And I don't really have a real, like, there's no hard and fast answer to it, because it's going to change depending on what the plant is sort of has to deal with and what's appropriate for it to do. Yeah, it's good. So plants respond to compliments, chocolates. No. So the that sound of chewing. All right, I think it's easy for us to sort of go, that makes sense. It's maybe surprising, but I don't think it is. It doesn't stretch your sort of credulity to go, yeah. If we accept that plants have the ability to sense the vibrations of sound, that something that they should be interested in should be whether they're being eaten, right? And so that sound of being chomped on, it feels like it could make sense, right? It's still, that research is still ongoing, so there's still lots of questions, but at least hopefully it doesn't feel wacky, right? Talking to your plants or playing the music, that is a very different world, right? Because if you think of the history of plants, why would a plant be interested in music, or why, like at a plant level? So, but you are still providing the energy of the sound and the vibrations. And so maybe you might hit the magic sort of frequencies and the magic combination of sounds that is triggering something that is appropriate that the plant would want to deal with. So there's been lots and lots of experiments done, and so there's people who've killed their plants with heavy metal. There's people who've said, oh, like a symphony orchestra is fantastic. There are people who've talked to their plants, and then people who've shouted at their plants. And there is no sort of scientific consensus about where all of that sits, other than lots of people have done lots of sound things. And sound, the idea that sound carries information that you can read out in the plant is still a little controversial, right? Because there's, lots of people have done lots of different experiments and always come to different conclusions. So I don't think there isn't a like, oh, if you play Chopin to tomatoes, you're going to get bigger tomatoes. There's nothing like that sort of resolution. There's even arguments about like, oh, people who've talked to plants and the plants have grown bigger, but not in a great controlled experiment. But plants are fantastically sensitive. So when you are talking to your plant, you're probably breathing on your plant. Your breath is enriched in carbon dioxide. Plants respond to carbon dioxide. So there's lots of things in the environment that make that sort of like what is going on a very complicated sort of puzzle to pull apart. Awesome questions. Yeah, this is fantastic. So doing all of that experimentation, especially that the experimentation lets you see the signals inside the plant, which has really been a sea change in how we've been able to sort of grasp the information processing inside the plant. That hasn't been done with every plant, obviously. There are a few sort of the lab rats of plant biology, just the models that everyone works on. But it's not just one plant. So there's some cress, a lot of crop plants, so things like maize and rice. Tobacco is a very easy plant to work with for researchers as well. And these phenomena, when they are studied, appear in all of those plants. But, there are, like 300,000 different species of plants. So we don't know we know that it's general in that whenever we've looked, we've found these kind of phenomena. But we've looked in the plants that researchers like to work with, which are a very particular set of plants. So my gut reaction, my gut feeling is this is just how biology works. And all plants are going to have all of these kind of sensory events, because if there's one thing that you have to do, doesn't matter whether you're a human being, a grass plant, an oak tree, or a firefly, you have to know what the world around you is doing in order to stay alive. And so I just think it's part and parcel of being alive that this is the kind of stuff that you do. Are there more intelligent and less intelligent plants? I don't know. I don't think we know. And also, what does it mean if like smarter or not smarter as a plant? I mean, plants are awesome. And they all have their own tricks about how they become so like prolific and dominate the worlds that we live in. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I grow vegetables in the garden, I know I have some incredibly dumb plants. But I think that may be more a reflection of me as a gardener than on the plants. Oh, yeah. So we as again, take it back to us, human beings. We have hormones that are floating around inside us that control how we develop, a lot of like what we do. And there are lots and lots of different ones, and they all have their own roles. And like whether you're going to, how tall are you growing, how you're feeling. Lots of we all know that there's a lot of hormone biology that makes human beings work the way they do. In plants, exactly the same thing. It's a different set of chemicals, right? They're different. Human hormones don't work in plants. Plant hormones don't work in humans, but they do the same kind of thing. So they move around inside the plant, they coordinate its activities, they regulate how it grows. The growing towards light is regulated by a hormone called auxin. Many of you may have know that hormone. In the horticulture world, it comes up, it's part of what rooting powder is. So it will regulate whether, a cut stem will make roots, that's auxin. It's also a constituent of some herbicides, because if you add it at a high enough concentration, the plant can't control how it grows anymore, and it kind of grows itself to death. But there are a gazillion other hormones. There are hormones related to whether you're going to defend yourself. That is a lot of that is related to a hormone called jasminic acid, and jasminates are part of the smell that you get in things like perfumes. Because where do we get the perfumes from? Well, we found things that smelled nice. What smells nice? Plants. Part of the smell of plants is this jasmonic acid. So there are tons and tons of other hormones. I have two answers for that. One of them is like the very researchy scientist answer, which is it starts instantly, right? Because if you imagine what you think what you're really doing when you prune, you are damaging, right? You're cutting off a bit of the plant, and the plant really didn't want to have that bit of itself removed. There are damaged cells which are left behind, right? You've got the main plant, you throw away the bit you've pruned off. Those cells that are left behind, they are damaged. They release that damaged set of signals, things like that amino acid glutamate, and they're freaking out because you've hacked a bit off the tree. So instantly, all of that damage program starts to kick in. And at the very short term, a lot of it is going to be about defending yourself. What on earth has happened? Plant doesn't know that you've gone in with a pair of pruners. It just knows that a bit of itself has been damaged. Maybe there's a herbivore chomping on it or something like that. So the very, very short term, very immediate response is to defend yourself. Then over the longer term, and that we're talking about instantaneous to seconds to minutes, defend yourself. Then you want to either repair yourself or plug up the wound. And so that is a different sort of suite of responses where you start to have to make more tissue. And so that's a lot about making more cells and cells dividing. And that's a much longer term set of programs. And that's being triggered immediately. But the outcome of it, of like building more plant and callousing over and all that kind of stuff, that is in the realms of days and weeks and months. First of all, there are no neurotransmitters in plants, right? And again, it's very, we have to, I keep on having to like step back because it's so easy to do. We have transmitters that move signals through us, and we have nerves, and so those chemical transmitters are neurotransmitters. Plants don't have nerves, right? So therefore they can't have neurotransmitters, but they have chemicals that move to trigger responses that have a role that is like neurotransmitters in that they are mobile and they're triggering rapid responses. But just have to be careful, like, because it's so easy to do, to just sort of project, oh, it's a neurotransmitter. It's a plant. We call it a plant transmitter. But then now I'm going to undermine my whole argument, because in your nerves, you have nerve-nerve junctions, and there are synapses, and you have chemical neurotransmitters that pass the information from one nerve across that link, the synapse, and trigger the next nerve. And one of those neurotransmitters is the amino acid glutamate, and there are protein receptors called glutamate receptors. And if you look in plants and ask, give me an example of a plant transmitter, I could tell you it would be glutamate. And then you'd go, well, how does the plant sense the glutamate? It has glutamate receptors. And if you look at the structure of the protein of that glutamate receptor, the plant protein, and you mapped it onto the shape of what the human nerve transmitter receptor looks like, almost identical, right?
Wow.
But so we know there are also some proteins that move around inside the plant that carry similar kind of information. There are some small molecules. There are things like there's a defense molecule, salicylic acid, the active component of aspirin. That is also one of these mobile molecules, right? So the signaling system is different. But then occasionally you just see these amazing, mind-blowing parallels. Oh, yeah, totally. Absolutely awesome question. You go, grafting has been done for centuries. millennia, right? And so you would think we would know exactly how it works. There are entire research programs on how grafting works, and when you realize that, you know, in Scandinavia, all of the trees which are grown for timber, they are all grafted. It's a huge, big business. Um, so lots of people are trying to work out what happens in the graft. We know that individual plants have some molecular mechanism of self. So, you know, when you put one plant, will know whether it's itself or a different plant. And the molecules that make that work, they aren't really well defined yet, but we know that that is true. What happens when you graft two plants together is that there's lots of cell divisions and, you know, lots of sort of merging. The big thing that has to happen is the plumbing system, the vascular tissues of those two grafts have to line up. And that's really what establishes a stable graft. But if the two plants are different, they're going to retain like their genetic identity in that graft. And the classic example of that, which sort of tells you like, oh, they still are kind of like, it's not melding into one being. It's like you've got the two identities still there. You may have heard of the fruit salad trees, where you graft lots and lots of different fruits onto one tree. So each branch gives you a different kind of fruit. They're awesome, but they require a lot of maintenance, because if you just let it grow, some of the branches are just going to outcompete all of the other branches, and they're just going to grow faster, and you're going to end up with a tree that basically has only one kind of fruit on it, because each of those individual grafts is still got the characteristics of the parent plant that it came from. So plants are emitting volatile chemicals like the pheromones that you hear from things like insects. So, and some of those volatile chemicals have been shown to trigger responses in other plants. And so I showed that example at hexanol 1, but that's a damaged plant. But you know, just a living plant can release volatile chemicals. And there's a researcher in California who's kind of shown that if you have one plant and other plants which are like downwind of it, those other plants are receiving the volatile chemicals from that original plant, and they are responding to it. So it's kind of the same theme as pheromones in that there are volatile chemicals carrying information, but it's a little bit different, like than insect pheromones. And we really, you know, insect pheromones, we know what the chemical is. We also know in the insect what the protein that sees that chemical is, what the receptor is. Or for you, you know, you can smell things, but we know inside your nose what the proteins are that are being triggered by those chemicals that you're smelling. And for plants, we really don't have that side of the equation yet. So it's not as clear about how it works. Ecosystems. So just, you can even ignore, just like put more in there than just the plants and put like the insects and all that kind of stuff. They respond to the environment, all of the organisms. So the plants totally are going to respond to the environment. So if something in that environment changes, which is important to them, you know, maybe something changes that is not going to really impact on the plants at all, they've probably not developed a system to monitor it because they don't care. But you know, if herbivores are moving through the environment, plants will want to know, right? Because they want to deal with that. So if again, it's tricky because there's no way that we can't do it. We can't not use the language of how we work to describe these things, and I think it's entirely appropriate to do it. But you just got to be careful that you don't sort of anthropomorphize and say that the plants are doing it because of the reasons that we would do it. Do they comfort themselves? Well, take out the word comfort. Do individual plants interact? Yes. Comfort is a very sort of, it's a very emotional sort of thing. And emotion takes us way into the realm of animals. It takes us into the human realm. And don't, that's not a concept that is easy to map onto plants. But the individual plants are clearly exchanging stuff between each other. Yeah, so I don't think I have a really good answer other than it just have to have that mental check every so often that you're not the way we're talking about it doesn't lead us down to having to project plants to be humans, because they're clearly not, and just like embrace plants for being plants.